Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for our October community conversation. It is always a great pleasure to be here with all of you, an honor to have you showing up for our monthly conversation, which this month will be with my good friend Sara Sheikh, who some of you know as Shamala Priya. Sara is a yoga teacher and a licensed clinical social worker with a trauma-informed holistic approach to therapy. She provides mental health counseling to people of all ages who are hoping to shed behaviors, feelings, and ways of thinking that no longer work for them. Her work is about empowering people to mindfully engage in a process of self-discovery and transformation. So we're going to explore topics at the intersection of mental health and yoga. Sara, thank you so very much for joining me for today's conversation about how to stay sane in an insane world.
Thank you, Hari. It's great to be here as a regular participant in the community conversations, usually listening in.
Yeah, and I'm very happy to have you in the guest seat as opposed to being a regular participant in the usual sense. Greetings to all of you who came in the last few minutes. Thank you all very, very much for being here. Sara, I wanted to start by hearing a little bit from you about how you got started practicing yoga and eventually teaching yoga, and how you got started as a social worker and therapist, and how those two things eventually came together for you.
Okay, sure. I think my journey into yoga began in my mid-20s. Um, I, my first kind of career in my late teens and mid to mid-20s was I was an organic vegetable farmer. I ran a community supported agriculture in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region. And I had a child pretty young. Um, and, growing up outside of Ithaca, New York, there's a lot of kind of alternative folks in that area. And I was already, in alternative culture in a way, even the school that I went to, and you know growing up in that area, I was just kind of exposed to that. Like the guy who would paint our house growing up was like the local yogi. He lived in this tiny little, his name was Tiny, and he lived in this very, very tiny house. And he was a yogi. And I remember even young being, I don't know, young in my teens, asking him if he would teach me yoga. And he just kind of was like, not sure if he wanted that level of responsibility in my life. And so, he gave me a book, Iyengar's, book, the classic book with the woman in the red leotard and da da da. But when I was pregnant, I started um, being more connected with different healers, midwives, healers, and such. And that was a really tumultuous time in my life of, after having my child and um, not having a great relationship with my child's dad and things like that. It was a very um, difficult time for me. And I met a person who became a mentor for me, and she was a yogi. She was also involved in like mindfulness meditation with Thich Nhat Hanh. And so I lived in a community household with this mentor, and the structure of the household was based on like living the yamas and niyamas, or trying to. And we had yoga classes in the house. We had weekly meditation sessions. And I was able to live there in community with my son up until he was about 8 years old. So that mentor really kind of grabbed me by the shoulders, and she was like, all right, you know how to do all this asana. You're very flexible, blah, blah, blah. That's not what you need. You need to understand how to live your life, how to interact with others, how to have healthy relationships, how to live by certain principles and values. And she was very kind of hardcore with me on that kind of tough love relationship. And she had me doing a lot of service. She was like, you need to do things, you need to be engaged. And I accepted that. I did. I just, when, I fully accepted it. I don't think I previously was a full-fledged vegetarian, but when she kind of laid out the scheme of what it means to be a yogi, I just said, okay, I'll be a vegetarian. Won't eat eggs, meat, fish, onions, garlic, da da da, and I'll start living in this community where we try to practice these things. And so that was really helpful and really hard. In those days, meditation wasn't that easy. I had all this combat internally in my mind, blah, going on. So I've had a lot of years of practice and opportunity for purification before I moved to Baltimore when I was 33. So I had, almost 10 years, or maybe, 9 years or 8 years under my belt of some aligning my life to yoga principles. And when I came to Baltimore, I felt that I had something to give. I had a very different kind of upbringing and experience than most people do living in Baltimore. So I felt that that was a good match for me, rather than where I was from, everybody's kind of like me. So I, was kind of just working jobs, getting paid $8 an hour, working in vegan restaurants, working at a vegetarian grocery store. And it just occurred to me, maybe the best thing I could do, what would be the best thing I could do? And I thought the best thing I can do is be a yoga teacher. So I had started practicing in a yoga studio, and that was the first time I had practiced in a yoga studio, because my relationship to yoga was very I didn't know about yoga studios. I thought yoga was like this thing you learn from a mentor and a community. So I found out about yoga studios and I realized, my God, you can become a yoga teacher. So I did a certification and I started teaching full time, and I started teaching in schools, in Baltimore City recreation centers with youth. And that was my specialty, is working in going to these communities, going to these locations and stepping into their world. And I really loved that, absolutely loved it. And during that process, I realized that, if first of all, I also needed a career, because I was like really kind of just living, um, you know, just I didn't have a lot, getting paid $8 an hour for work, and raising a child isn't the easiest thing to do. Um, So I thought, all right, I need to also have a career. And I had a really good therapist in Ithaca um, when my son was really young. And she was an inspiration for me. She was also a very spiritual woman. And that seed was also planted in me during that age, during that time when I was practicing yoga and doing my own trauma therapy. And so that seed also fructified, right? To say, okay, well, I think this would match. This would also help to open, if I become a clinical social worker, that would also help to open the doors of sharing yoga in places that I'm already sharing, but no, and really, it doesn't really matter if you're a yoga teacher, but if you're a clinical social worker, that gives you a little more, oh, and it did. I became a clinical social worker and people were like, oh, you're you're somebody now. Oh, wow. We have a
Your,
lot of
your,
respect for you.
yeah, your authority changed dramatically.
Completely. I was like, oh, well, I guess so, you know? Um, so, and it was, I found my dharma. I found my, um, this lifetime, occupational dharma
Hmm.
matched with a growing eternal dharma.
Cool.
And yeah, and that's how I met Hari, is through the yoga community. You know, I was looking for something that I thought would be real yoga, like an authentic teachings of yoga. And I waited and I waited and I waited. I remember telling myself, just be patient, just wait. Don't get involved in all this stuff that you know is not what you need and it does not seem true to you. And then yeah, and then I met Hari, and that skyrocketed everything else
That was
in my
my good fortune that you happened to wander into my class.
life. Yeah,
So
well, that's
you're
nice.
so so you're in a pretty good position to help people navigate the intersection of yoga and mental health, and not just people in general, but particular kinds of people who have had similar challenging experience to yours as a single mother, people who live in challenging circumstances and challenging communities where the needs are a little different from what people need who live in either more, let's call it privileged situations, or more advantageous settings. So let's talk first about what the intersection of yoga and mental health looks like in general.
Well, yoga, it's a massive intersection. You know, be, in one way speaking, everything impacts our mental health. Everything that we do, our mental health is so fragile, right? It's part of our subtle body, and it's this thing that is constantly in motion. This idea that we can control our mind is completely ludicrous. We can guide and direct our mind. So our mind is constantly affected by everything that we do in our life. And yoga offers an absolutely complete lifestyle approach that has this incredible impact on our mental health. And even with that yoga, and I can go into detail about all the ways in which yoga um, speaks to our life, guides our lifestyle and our values, for everything. And even still, we will have issues with our mental health, even if we utilize all of the tools and all of the wisdom and knowledge and association connected with yoga, we will still have this mind that is prone to moving into a state of disturbance and illusion.
Mm.
So mm, it's a constant meeting and tending to and guiding and checking. So yoga helps us to find those aspects of ourself that can be qualified to do that or qualified to seek the guidance to do that. Um, so I truly believe, yes, yoga offers a complete um, uh, map for how to increase our mental wellness. Yoga speaks to, yoga helps us understand what to eat, how to cook, you know, how to sleep, when to wake, what our home should be like, what our actual home should be like, a place of pilgrimage, a place of worship, what our relationships, what kinds of relationships can we have, how do we behave, how do we act, what is our etiquette within those relationships, um, what do we do, what's our purpose in life, what's our dharma. It helps us answer those questions. All of the questions that people come, or problems people come to a mental health therapist for, are things that yoga can essentially offer guidance around.
Mm.
Yeah.
So there were three things that you said that I thought were particularly significant, and I'd like to circle back to. One, we hear, you said that you spoke about the difficulty of controlling the mind as opposed to directing the mind. And we
Mhm.
hear in yoga an awful lot about how important it is to control the mind, and how difficult that can be, and how the practice is about directing the mind.
Mhm.
So sometimes we hear the definition of yoga. Yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind. And we misinterpret that as meaning we need to make the mind stop,
Mhm.
as opposed to directing the mind to a singular place. So I want to
Mhm.
come back to that and the intersection of mental health and the relationship between controlling and directing the mind. Then the second
Absolutely.
thing, the second thing was how it's it's a it's a constant thing, and
Mhm.
that there are what you inspired me to think of is that there are elements that are beyond our control, like physiological things. Like you can be very advanced on the path of yoga, but then you're not immune to uh, physiological causes of mental distortion, such as dementia and such like that. So that issue came up. And then the third thing was how yoga gives us instruction about how to live in the world insofar as creating the environment in our home that is conducive for mental health, how we conduct our relationships with people. And part of your specialty is helping people who have very problematic home situations and have very problematic family relationships, and how you create an environment with while dealing with those obstacles can be really, really challenging. So I want to come back to those. So let's come back first to the idea of controlling the mind versus directing the mind, and how that works both for mental health and for yoga.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, we have a control complex. I mean, most people do come to therapy because there is a theme around this, a sense of responsibility and control, or responsibility and shame, or responsibility and a feeling of guilt. So this idea of controlling the mind, I mean, it's a really tricky word in our society. If you think of your mind as one part of yourself, it's one part of yourself. It's like if you could draw a picture of your mind, what would that mind person look like, right? And it's not that we want to control, right? That's our problem. We want to control everything. We don't have control. So having that humility to know that, I'm not going to be able to control and force something in a kind of like a harmful way to that it's just not good enough. It's got to be like this. That sets us up for a very frustrating experience. But if we know the things that the mind likes, and if we also know that we have a parallel experience, we have a spiritual parallel self alongside this material, temporary, constantly changing self. And if there's a way that we can assist our mind also to tap into some of the activities that strengthen and cultivate our eternal, joyful, connected, spiritual, changeless self, that can also feel very satisfying to the mind. So it's also learning how to nourish and give the mind activities that are deeply nourishing, not just temporarily satisfying to our senses, but more deeply satisfying. So that's why I say, what do you bring to the mind? What do you bring to the mind? And, certainly we all have learned about the modes, the material modes of nature, of the material nature, right? The modes of goodness, the modes of passion, the modes of lethargy or illusion or ignorance, some might describe it as, right? So we utilize some of the knowledge from the yoga system to bring our mind into environments like that are more in the mode of goodness, or to understand how our mind is being impacted, that we have to utilize our intelligence to discern what's happening here. Why is my mind getting degraded, right?
Mhm.
Because something is happening, and I'm using my intelligence and the knowledge from yoga to create a realignment. And that could be through our hearing, by purifying the mind through how we take in through things through our ears, our hearing, what we see, searching for beauty, searching for gratitude in the world, through our speech, aligning our speech and our tongue, how we eat with the mode of goodness and beyond, to a spiritual level, a transcendental level. So that's
Mm.
how we bring our mind to places. We are the primary caregivers of our mind. And that's how I like to see it. That's,
That's
that's
a
what,
really interesting way to put it that I haven't heard before, that we are the caregivers of our mind, that our mind is like someone we are responsible for taking care of. And you spoke about using the power of discernment to be able to see what yoga wisdom calls the triguna, the three qualities of material nature, luminance, passion, and darkness, and to be able to recognize how our minds are being influenced by these different modes of being. And from that vision, of our own minds, being able to care for our minds appropriately. As Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, the mind can be, it's difficult to control the mind, but it can be done by appropriate practice. And so using our discernment as caretakers of the mind to determine what is the appropriate practice to bring equanimity to the mind, bring peacefulness to the mind, to elevate the mind beyond the qualities of material nature that you referred to an actual transcendental position,
Right.
is a
Right.
really, really interesting way to think about it.
Yeah. And we have the option to do those things at the same time. We can be taking care of our mind by having the right material environment and
Mhm.
things to digest, to allow the mind to digest. And it can be dovetailed into that onto a transcendental level as well.
Mm. So the more you answer my questions, the more questions I end up having. And before I go any further with the questions that I have, I want to throw it out to everyone who is here with us, and welcome to all of you who joined us after our conversation got started. Thank you very much for being here. If you have any questions or comments or insights with regard to what Sara is sharing with us, please go ahead and use the React tool on the bottom to raise your hand, or you can type a question or comment into the chat. Or if you like, you can just unmute yourself and share what you're thinking. Stanley, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Sarah and Hari. This is so, so interesting and important. One of my questions as you were describing some of the different tools and strategies, that can be applied from yoga to the work that you do more in the mental health counseling realm does breath work play a role at all in the work that you do in terms of working with individuals to address some issues such as things like being able to quiet the mind or deal with issues like anxiety or stress? Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, that's a great question. And that's the beauty of this yoga wisdom, that it also addresses and informs how we take care of our physical body, because like you said, you know, that anxiety, it shows up as a physical feeling. It can turn into, a panic attack, an illness. So some of the first rungs on the ladder the asanas are movements that really do help regulate this incredible, intricate physical system that we have: our circulatory system, our respiratory system, our metabolism, you know, um, our nervous system. So all of these things are tone our system as best as they can, right? Again, similar to the mind, that we can do our best, and it may not be perfect, okay? And the breath and the pranayama, absolutely. Pranayama is described as something that helps to still, right? Or to still, or yeah, to still the fluctuations of the mind. So it is an important, very important part of yoga practice. And we're seeing that all the time in counseling, you know, um, breathing exercises, are used as a coping strategy, right? or physical movement, exercise, our understanding of our vagus nerve, right? All of those things are like yoga hits those with the asana and with the pranayama. And those things then create a foundation or a nice soil for hearing wisdom, for having the space in your life to be reflective and to have that pause to then make other choices that are not just out of habit or ancestral passing, passed down ancestrally. And it allows us that ground to be able to meditate, to start bringing our mind and our consciousness to a chosen object. So yeah, thank you for that. Do you feel like that answered your question, or did you have thoughts about that as well? Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Stanley. Yeah, there's a good reason why pranayama is between asana and the different stages of meditation, turning before you turn your senses inward. I've always understood it as the bridge between the breath as the bridge between the body and the mind, and settling the mind with pranayama prior to meditation is a very helpful, like kind of table setting way to get the most out of your meditation practice. Yeah, Sarah, thank you for that really nice explanation. Paula and then Sophia. Unmute yourself, please, Paula.
Sorry. How or what techniques or methods do you use to introduce people that do not do yoga to recognize the eternal, joyful, true self, Atma, that's within each of us, especially if they're resistant to meditation?
Mm-hmm. So how would I or someone help to bring someone? Can you repeat your question again? I'm trying to frame it in the right.
For someone that is not familiar with yoga and perhaps doesn't even have a religious background,
Yeah.
how do you introduce them or help guide them to recognize their eternal, joyful self that resides within?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. That is the ultimate question for me, in the work that I do, and being a bhakti practitioner, because it's delicate. It's a delicate thing, and it really is a creative process with each person to find what is going to, what is the right thing for them in that moment. Uh, so it's very specific, it's very individual to the person. I do tend to, I definitely plant a lot of seeds,
Okay.
say. And I know one of the things that Hari and I were going to talk about were some of the obstacles that, the obstacles to accepting and receiving the wisdom of yoga, so, and you mentioned that there might be, there might not be a strong connection to a faith orientation, or there might be a hurt or a pain or a trauma connected with religion, of community and faith and all of those things. So, I do have to tread carefully around that. So it might not be the first thing I do is say, hey, you have a spiritual aspect of yourself as well, and why don't we start cultivating that? And hey, what's your relationship to God? I might not be able to be as direct just as my own process, it was very gradual. It was
True.
gradual. So I also trust, that's where faith comes in for me too. I trust that I'm planting seeds, I'm helping to lay a foundation. I'm working at a certain pace that's not harmful to the person. You know, if I try to move too fast and give them something that they can't digest, they're gone, they're out, you know. So it's better to take my time and to help people with some of their immediate needs, because again, of and for the suffering of others, and to not be aloof to that, to not go over their head in spiritual bypass, but to say, how can I help you with the concerns that you feel are the most important? Can
Okay,
everybody hear
thank
me
you.
okay? Because I got like some kind of, I'm answering your question and I'm not answering it because it's such a big topic, but was that helpful? I'm curious. How did that land?
Okay, so I'm about to be certified as a yoga therapist and working with people with high anxiety. Like you said, I plant seeds about how to find joy within.
Yes.
And first of all, the fact that it even exists is kind of mind-blowing for some people.
Yes. Yes.
And like you said, tread carefully, meet them where they're at, keep
Yeah.
planting seeds, and when the seed starts that little sprout, give it a little water, help it
Yeah.
grow.
Yes. And to speak about some tools and strategies is that I might ask questions like, you know, describe a time where you did feel more calm, more neutral, more connected, more grounded. And so I'm searching for, what is this person's resources? Is it a person, a place, an object, a feeling, nature, an animal? And then expanding that, let them feel that and use it as a meditation point to let that state of being expand.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
that
true.
and then would it be possible to take that state of being more calm, more neutral, more grounded, more connected, more joyful to this situation that's challenging for you? What would
Okay.
it be like? And then, you start, because that's what we do as yogis. We try to bring our resources, our consciousness to difficulty all around us. There's difficulty every day. We're faced with this again, this difficulty. So it is a practice. Believe me, they're already learning those practices without me having to say anything, which is really, really beautiful. It's what state of being would you like to experience more? And they might not know completely, but it's something. They have something, because the Lord, is present in everyone. There is assistance and help. That Paramatma is present with everyone, right? So I have to trust that they're also going to have some guidance from within.
Thank you.
Paula, thank you very much for your excellent question. We do want to circle back to obstacles in general, and what other obstacles, in addition to the one you brought up, Paula. But before we do and go on to other questions, we have Sophia. Sophia, please go ahead.
I'm a Kundalini yoga teacher, and in our practice, in our training, we're always taught, like, you're not a therapist, you're not diagnosing, you're not. So I tread the waters very carefully. But with the emergence of these 1 to 2 days breathing workshops, there is a lot of people that are coming in with heightened sensitivity, and just yesterday, due to hurricane preparedness, I only had one person in class, first-time student, very young. And he shared with me, because it was just the two of us, he shared with me that he participated in one of these breathing workshops. And what he described as spiritual awakening, that put him into 2 weeks of a manic state, that so he was just not sleeping and just was seeing everything through a different lens. His family, his parents, freaked out and put him in the psychiatric observation hospital, and now he's on medication. And I was kind of uncertain. I trust my inner guidance and I trust my compass to be able to guide a student through the practice. But having been informed with this information, I was kind of questioning, like, wow, is it enough to be just a yoga teacher at this point? Like, do I have to look into additional resources for myself to be able to hold space for someone with that kind of experience? And so I was very gentle in guiding him through the practice, focusing on more grounding and spinal movement. And and even though I don't know the whole story, I'm asking, like, what guidance can you offer to teachers that encounter things like that?
That's a great question and an important, right, thing. We have community, right? So we need community. We need other healers, other resources, other individuals in our community to refer people to. We can't do everything alone. Each of us are so complex. There's so much need and complexity. And so I'm constantly developing my referral network and of caring, loving, kind helpers in the community. Yeah. So you probably already have a bit of that. I find that that's helpful for me when I feel like, gosh, this is just not my area. This is not my area of expertise. We don't want to go outside of our role, because that can also be misleading to another person, and that could potentially cause harm by not allowing them to find the right resource. So I would say that is number one. That is the first line of defense of care, community care.
So thank you for that. I've advised him that his parents, not the enemies, they're allies, and they're doing what they feel is the best for him, and to seek maybe a second opinion or a therapist that is more spiritually inclined. And that's all I could offer him. Like, I don't have a book of therapists that I would recommend. It's so interesting, but maybe it would be good for a studio to have something like that on hand.
Yeah, and I do that in my community. Like, if someone needs someone, because, okay, let's say I'm in this network of therapists, I have colleagues all over the country and internationally, and I find certain modalities very, very effective and bridge really well with spirituality. In fact, you'd think that some of them are rooted in some of the wisdom that comes from yoga philosophy, of how they were developed, because there's some really nice compatibilities. So, I frequently do that. Do you know someone in California? Do you know someone in Sweden? Do you know? Yeah, let me link you with a helping person.
Sophia, thank you very much for that very thoughtful question and sharing that experience. I think that when we take the seat of the teacher in a yoga class or in a workshop or develop relationships with students, yeah, we find ourselves in these kinds of challenging positions where we feel some responsibility to care for someone or give them direction that will be helpful. We also had a nice comment from Nurit while you were speaking. This is a very important topic, and it's true. This is why before we start with pranayama, we cultivate the asana practice, which establish the connection with the earth. The earth seems like a crazy place. And one of the things we said we would talk about today is what are our best strategies for maintaining our equilibrium during such tumultuous times. But before we even approach that question, is the world really as crazy as it seems to be? Sarah, what do you think about the state of the world? You know, it seems pretty crazy. Is it really as crazy as it seems?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely is. And more than that, it is. And at the same time, if you are using the yoga wisdom to help you understand why things are like the way they are, then we'll also understand that no, there is a complete understanding of why it's going amok like this, why it is the way it is. That there's also laws. There's laws of nature. There's there's a whole framework to understand what it is that we're seeing and experiencing in the world. So yes, it is cray cray. And it also makes complete sense.
So this is another really interesting intersection that perhaps we can quickly look at the terrain of, because as a mental health professional, you are dealing with science, particularly the natural sciences. And when we get tools from yoga philosophy about understanding the world, it's very metaphysical. The way many of you have heard me use this analogy that, if you understand how something works, you know how to respond to it. If you know what a toaster does and how it works, then you know how to turn bread into toast. So similarly, if you know how the world works and why it is the way it is, then it makes it easier to respond to it. You know what to do with the world. But it introduces this metaphysical idea, that one of which you referred to earlier, the three qualities of material nature, which is probably not something you would find in a science-based textbook about mental health. So I'm wondering how you integrate what we know about the world from natural science and how that applies to mental health, and what we hear about the world from the metaphysics of yoga philosophy, and how you integrate these two things to give people strategies for keeping their equilibrium.
Yeah, well, it's just that it's saying this is what yoga wisdom says about the material world. So I introduce it like that. Here's a frame that can be helpful. Here's a frame that I utilize, and this comes from yoga wisdom, So it's as simple as that. And people absolutely love it. They're like, my God, that's so helpful. Now, that can be done also with other frames to some extent around the concept of time. I can say, here's a frame from yoga wisdom around time, or around our purpose, or around, any of those topics, right? And then let it land where it does, you know, for people, right? Can they utilize it? And then it's the question, is this something that you could utilize in your life? How might you? You know, based on the specific difficulty that they're experiencing.
Okay. All right. So making that clear distinction between yoga philosophy and, say, clinical therapeutics and such like that.
Yeah.
It's how you introduce these ideas, and it's really just a matter of the receptivity of the person you're speaking to.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, the people that you are speaking to, irrespective of logic, will feel a certain way or feel some other way. And, you know, according to the influence of the mind, the influence of the combination of the qualities of material nature that are impacting them, is it possible to feel our feelings or embrace our feelings without being overwhelmed by them? I know a lot of people, that's their real concern, is that they feel overwhelmed, or they feel stressed out, or they feel so discouraged. How do we embrace our feelings without being overwhelmed by our feelings?
Mhm. Mhm. That's yeah, such a great question. Really, really important one, because feelings just they pop up, and if we try to push them down, they're just gonna pop up harder. So the way that I help clients with that is to learn again how to, you know, in yoga, we understand that we have, we're in a witness, right? Our Hari does this great meditation that takes us through all of our subtle body, our gross body, you know, to our spiritual sense of self, and this witness. Well, who is it? Who is it that's witnessing all of these activities of the body and the mind and the emotion? So I present that. It's also a therapeutic modality called internal family systems, where there's a self leader that emerges. It's your spiritual self leader, right? Who supports and interacts and forms a relationship with all of these different parts of ourselves. And we can find those parts. One way that we find that part is through emotion. There's a part of me that feels anxious, and I'm going to turn inward toward myself, utilizing my self leader
Mm.
to witness and notice that part, that one little part. Again, right? It's not all of me. What happens is that we become blended with that part. It's a small part, anxious part, right? We think, oh, we become disillusioned. That's who I am. That's all of who I am. No, it's not.
Mm.
It's a part of you. So let's look for the trailhead. What does that part look like if you were to turn in toward that part and be curious? Activate your self-leadership qualities of curiosity, compassion, calm, confidence, and a bunch of other C's. And I should try to remember all the C's that describe this self-leader. And form a relationship with that anxious part. Form a relationship with that part that's scared, that's sad,
Mm.
and look for it. What do they look like? That 8-year-old me, that pre-verbal me, that young me, those vulnerable parts, that intense teenage manager part, firefighter part of me that wants to control everything and is going to whip me into shape because, you know, self-critical of myself, da da da. So it's learning those strategies of how do you turn inward to care for. Again, that's where that we are the primary caregivers to our parts,
Mm.
to our emotions. Bhakti is relational. Spiritual life is relationship based. That all exists
And
within us. That all exists within
And,
us.
and what you just described is a very nice way to think of turning inward, pratyahara, not as a
Yeah,
kind of escapism, not as kind of a turning your back on everything, but rather as a way of integrating, simultaneously giving some distance insofar as not identifying with the feeling, thinking I am this feeling, but
right.
using this technique as a tool for identifying the feeling, building a relationship with the feeling, rather than being that feeling. And that is a, sometimes we think of turning inward as escapism, when what you're describing is actually not escapism, but engagement with how the world affects you. We have just a
Yes.
few minutes left. C had a very nice comment about this integration or this relationship between yoga wisdom and the natural science underpinnings of mental health. I would be curious to see how trauma and psychology informed shamans, gurus, and spiritual leaders would inform this question. I have the sense that this is the guidance that many people are needing during a spiritual awakening, to not become medicated and to learn how to navigate different states of consciousness. So yeah, I think that this is a very interesting open space, this space between mental health and spiritual wisdom. We are actually at our stopping point. C, thank you for that comment. Are there any final questions for Shyamala for Sara, before we sign off on our community conversation for today? Any last thoughts? All right. Sara, thank you so much for having this conversation with us. Very, very illuminating and very, very relevant. And thanks to all of you for taking the time to participate in our conversation today. I look forward to seeing you next time for our next community conversation. Have a great, wonderful, fabulous, fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you, Hari. Thanks, everyone.